Hey there, Internet people. Welcome back to Ravenwing Gaming, or welcome if you're new. It's another Monday video, so it's time for us to talk about some more Warhammer stuff, and today we are continuing on with our faction focus on the Dark Angels. Now, we've already talked a little bit about their lore, their detachments, we even talked about the Deathwing, but today we are focusing on another subset of the Dark Angels known as the Ravenwing. We're going to talk about a little bit about what even is a Ravenwing, because that's kind of a weird name, but we're going to talk a bit about what they do, what their deeper mission is. We're going to talk a little bit about their units, and if we've got time, if this video doesn't get too long, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the potential combos I've seen for the Ravenwing going forward in 10th. So this should be a good one. The Ravenwing are one of my favorite aspects of the Dark Angels. Now, as the name of this channel might imply, I'm mostly a green wing guy. I'm all about my boys in green. But the Ravenwing are also super cool. They're unique, they've got great imagery, and they've consistently been performers on the tabletop. But I'm going to also be talking to you a little bit about why that might not be the case going forward. But before we get into all that, I would just like to remind you guys that I am very new to YouTube, that this is being filmed during like my second month of being a YouTuber. This faction focus is going to end up taking up most of the like third month of the channel. So at this point, pretty much any engagement really does help. By clicking on this video, you've already done me a huge solid, but I'm hoping I can ask you to do just a little bit more, maybe watch all the way to the end. Liking, subscribing, the usual, it all helps. It all manipulates the algorithm so that maybe more people see this and more subscribers hop on, so that hopefully one day this could be something I do full-time. That would be pretty cool. So yeah, with all that shameless self-promotion out the way, we're talking about the Ravenwing, so let's just get into it. Okay, we're talking about the Ravenwing. Let's start with the basics. What is it? What is a Ravenwing? Well, short answer, the Ravenwing is the second company of the Dark Angels chapter of Space Marines. Pretty simple, right? Except not at all, because Warhammer. So yes, like the Ravenwing are the second company, but it's a little more complicated than that, because they are also the thing that makes the Dark Angels pretty heavily divergent from normal Codex Space Marines. You know, like, I want to say like 75% of what the Dark Angels do, at least officially, is completely Codex compliant. Their 10th company is where their new recruits go. Their 9th through 3rd companies are all completely normal, in line with the Codex. Even the Deathwing, like, okay, the fact that it's all Terminators, like exclusively Terminators, is a little weird, but not, like, first companies are usually pretty Terminator heavy anyway. That, comparing the Deathwing to a normal first company is kind of like comparing a tuna sandwich to a tuna melt. Yeah, they're different, but there's a lot of overlap there. Whereas the second company, the Ravenwing, comparing the Ravenwing to a normal second company, that's more like comparing a tuna melt to the Golden Gate Bridge. Not even kind of the same thing. Mostly because the Ravenwing are made entirely of fast movers. They are made up of bikes, speeders, aircraft. Anything that's on foot, anything that has treads, pretty much anything that doesn't fly or go super fast, they want nothing to do with it. If you are not on a bike, if you are not the embodiment of speed, you have no place in their crew. They are Sonic the Hedgehog. They gotta go fast. And that works about, that functions in the functions in Warhammer on the battlefield. As you might expect, they are preeminent shock troops. They are great at blasting through enemy weak points and really forcing the enemy to go to ground, which then makes the enemy super vulnerable against more conventional arms like the Green Wing or a hammer blow from the Deathwing Terminators, literally the best Terminators in the galaxy. So that's how the Ravenwing works. We're not going to go super deep into the lore. This isn't a lore video, mostly because I'm not good enough at editing these videos to make a good lore video. There's a reason this isn't a lore channel. So that's a brief history of what they are, what they do on the battlefield. In the next video, we're going to cover a little bit what the Deathwing and Ravenwing do in terms of, like, their more hidden missions, because I didn't bring this up in the last video, but the Deathwing and Ravenwing, yes, they have their battlefield roles of, like, hammer blow Terminator assaults, you know, having the ballsiest teleportation assaults out of any chapter in the Imperium, having arguably the best or potentially just the second best bikes and fast movers in the Imperium. Yeah, sure, that adds a lot of versatility. They have a deeper purpose, and that kind of goes beyond the scope of this video. Today, we are just talking about how the Ravenwing is doing in 10th edition. Like, literally pure gameplay, how are they doing? And the answer is not great. The Ravenwing got nerfed pretty hard, which is understandable. They were kind of a menace in 9th edition, so that's just sort of how that goes. Dark Angels were super powerful in 7th. They were F tier, bottom of the barrel in 8th. They became amazing in 9th. They're probably not going to be great in 10th, as evidenced by our terrible detachment rules. But the Ravenwing got particularly nerfed. They got hit harder than the Deathwing, in my opinion. One man's view. What made them nerfed so hard? Well, first of all, they lost all of their special rules, which was to be expected in a new edition, I'll be fair, but they didn't get any new ones. There are not any new Ravenwing abilities to replace any of the ones they lost. Also, they lost literally half their roster. Out of 16 distinct units, they lost 8 of them. And the reason I say that is because, like, Space Marine bikes, attack bikes, outriders, land speeders, and the 3 different types of storm speeders, and something else that is escaping my mind at the moment, none of them are Codex or are Ravenwing units anymore. All of those units had like a little excerpt on their datasheet saying if this unit belongs to a Dark Angels detachment, they gain the Ravenwing keyword and all of the applying rules. They don't have that anymore. So, yeah, the Ravenwing lost most of their arsenal. You know, while they do still technically have the Champion, Apothecary, and Ancient for the Ravenwing, they all got lumped into one squad, so you can't even, like, send them off to where they would be useful. They're just all lumped together, and spoiler alert, the Command Squad is a completely garbage unit that you're never gonna take, but we'll get to that in a minute. So if we're gonna talk about the datasheets, let's talk about the big honcho of them all, Samael, the Grandmaster of the Ravenwing. He is the Ravenwing's named character, and a pretty iconic part of the Dark Angels lore. If you really want to see a great piece of fiction surrounding Samael, read the book Ravenwing by Gav Thorpe. Not only one of my favorite books, or I think actually my favorite story having to do with the Dark Angels, and just a really good book all around. So if you haven't read it, give it a look. But Samael in previous editions, he's actually pretty similar. He's one of the few units that didn't really get nerfed that hard, and ironically enough, didn't get nerfed nearly as hard as Belial, the named character from the Deathwing. That's a little weird, but whatever. So stats-wise, Sam dropped from 14 inches of movement to 12, but that happened to all bike units for the Space Marines. They all lost 2 inches of movement, which I'm not real sure why, but they did. And then, other than that, he's pretty much on par with what he is, a Space Marine character on a bike. He's toughness 5, 7 wounds, 3 up armor save, 4 up invulnerable. He's strength. Actually, no, strength isn't even a core stat anymore. He's got an objective control of 2 and a leadership of 6+. 4 up, I'm pretty sure I mentioned 4 up invulnerable. Like I said, pretty standard stuff. Literally just a Space Marine captain, but on his cool hover bike. Which, yeah, I should probably mention for those of you not familiar. Samael gets to ride a super cool hover bike. The only Space Marine who gets to do that anymore. He's still got his plasma cannon attached to it. It's pretty box standard. It's basically always supercharged, but it doesn't have the hazardous rule, so he's not going to kill himself using it. It's got blast, D3 shots. Yeah, it is what it is. Let's be real, no one takes Samael for his shooting. That's not what he's for. Because like his Storm Bolter went from having 2 Storm Bolters to having just the one and it's twin linked. Whatever. His shooting is about what it was. He's slightly better against tougher units than he was, slightly worse against hordes. His melee is a little bit worse, but not dramatically so. He used to have an ability that gave him, that on a turn when he charged, he went from strength 6 to strength 8 with his sword. He doesn't have that anymore, and I would have thought they would have given him the Lance rule to replace that, because that's just +1 to wound on the charge. He doesn't. He doesn't get that, so that's a little weird. But yeah, his sword is still strength 6, AP 3, damage 2, has sustained hits 1, so anytime he rolls a 6, he gets 2 extra hits, which, oddly enough, statistically, if he rolls like a perfectly statistical roll, he actually ends up with more hits than he had attacks. Which I just think that's kind of fun. So, yeah. He has 2 abilities. The one is called Grandmaster of the Ravenwing, which just says that a bike unit he joins gains the ability to shoot and charge after advancing, even if they don't have assault weapons. Which, yeah. And spoiler alert, he can only join bike units. That probably shouldn't surprise anybody. He can't join, like, a land speeder squadron. You know? He certainly can't join infantry, which I understand it and I don't. I think it is kind of a bummer, but I get it, not wanting to have different units that are different toughness and different movement in the same squad with regular foot sloggers. So, I get it. But yeah, other than that, the only other thing he has, I mean, yeah, the whole advance and shoot thing's kind of nice, but you were going to learn why it's not that good after all, because he can only join things like, you know, Space Marine Bikers, Black Knights, Command Squads, Outriders. None of them really have amazing shooting. So, and even the ability to advance and charge, Ravenwing doesn't really have any particularly good melee, so maybe you're starting to understand why I'm saying Ravenwing's in kind of a rough spot. But yeah, his other ability is called Cut Off Their Retreat. Anytime you fall back from a unit, including Samael, they have to take a desperate breakout check. So roll 1d6 for every model in the squad. On a 1, the model dies. And if that unit is already battle shocked, his ability says they now take a -1 penalty to their desperate breakout. It's whatever. It's kind of neat, I guess. Super situational. Probably never going to come up. Yeah. You're probably never going to use that ability, or very rarely. 90% of the time, it's never going to be a factor. And I'm saying 90% of the time that you even take Sam, which you might not do because he's kind of expensive, and some people just don't like take. And if you're going to take an epic hero, you would probably want to take the Lion or Azrael, who we're going to talk about in the next video. Going on to the next character, we have the Talon Master. Lore-wise, this is literally just a Space Marine Lieutenant, but in a land speeder. That's the whole thing. I mean, there's like a whole complicated thing about like Gilliman insisting the Ravenwing and Deathwing needed to have lieutenants, so they came up with the Strike Master and Talon Master. But like, yeah, it's a lieutenant in a land speeder. I've loved the Talon Master since he came out in 8th edition. His shooting isn't quite as good, in my opinion, because he used to be an absolute terror for lower tier infantry, anything like T3, or even for a lot of T4 stuff. His 12 assault cannon shots, his 6 heavy bolter his 6 heavy bolter shots were a terror. They would just absolutely obliterate whole squads. Even Space Marine squads might not get deleted, but they would take some heavy casualties, and that's really not the case anymore because the number of shots got cut in half but got reroll wounds. So again, he's now better against tougher things. He's slightly better against tougher things, slightly worse against hordes, which was kind of a shame because he was like the one character I can think of that actually had really amazing shooting. So that's kind of a shame, but oh well. He became T7. He's got 6 wounds. Because he's a Ravenwing unit, you know, the few units left in the Ravenwing all got a 5-up invulnerable, which they kind of already had. The Ravenwing's thing was that if they move at all, they gain a 5-up invuln. If they advanced, they used to be able to get a 4-up invuln. They can't do that anymore, and now it's just a flat 5-up. Yeah. And so the Talon Master, he doesn't, like every other lieutenant, he no longer gives out the reroll ones to wound bubble. That's to be expected. Instead, he now provides a 6-inch bubble of ignores cover, which I still think is really solid. It's not going to be relevant for everybody, but particularly for the Ravenwing, I think he's going to be super important, because bikes, outriders, even a lot of land speeders, they don't have amazing AP on a lot of their weapons. They're either AP nothing or AP 1, so ignoring cover is going to be a big deal for those types of guns. So I think that's actually really useful. It's the big reason why I would take the Talon Master. Although I say he's good for the Ravenwing, he's pretty much just good for anything with low AP weapons. Whether that's intercessors, tacticals, even heavy bolter devastators. Taking a Talon Master to let them ignore cover is probably going to be pretty relevant. And the fact that he's relatively tough at 6 wounds, 5 up invulnerables, toughness 7. So he's not really afraid of assault cannons or auto cannons, stuff like that. Plus, he has a special Talon Master rule that says if he's near a mounted or fly unit, he has lone operative, which means you cannot target him if you're more than 12 inches away, as long as he stays close to bikes, speeders, planes, stuff like that. He also has an ability that kind of synergizes with that I forget the name of it, but what it does is that if you finish any kind of a move within 9 inches of him, he can make a 6-inch move. So if you're trying to get within 12 to be able to shoot him, he's just gonna move 9 inches. He's just gonna move 6 inches away back into lone operative range, so that you can't hit him. Same thing with charging. You want to charge him? Cool. He moves back 6 inches. You can't charge him anymore. No big deal. And so, yeah, those movement shenanigans are kind of helpful for keeping him alive. The ignores cover thing, really helpful for buffing your other units. For me, I'm going to just be parking him next to my Vengeance Speeder and some Devastators. And just keep him safe that way. And one other thing I'm going to mention is he does still have a power weapon. He does still have the power sword he had in other editions. He remains weirdly good at melee. Yeah, I don't really know what that's about, but yeah, particularly if you put as usual, the best thing for him in 8th and 9th was giving him the Heavenfall Blade, so that he could go nuts in melee. That's still the best thing to give him. give him the Heavenfall Blade, and he's I guess technically speaking, giving him the Shroud of Heroes so he can just revive on a 2+, also really good. But the Heavenfall Blade basically makes him just as good as Samael in melee, which is kind of crazy. Because it makes his sword... His sword is normally damage 2. The Heavenfall Blade enhancement would make it damage 3. If he gets battle shocked somehow, he'd be damage 4. So right away, he's now actually a little bit better than Sam at melee. But yeah, that's the Talon Master. He's still looking pretty solid. Him and Sam are probably one of the only units looking good for the Dark Angels these days. So that brings us to the next 2 units that we need to talk about, and unfortunately, these are this is the really bad news for Dark Angels. We're talking about the Black Knights and the Command Squad. I'm gonna go ahead and say it right off the bat. These guys are F tier. You are probably never going to take them, ever under any circumstances. Because they still have Strength 7 Plasma that if you supercharge it, it'll get better, become Strength 8, Damage 2, better AP, and then they'll kill themselves on a rollable 1. So right away, they still have all the downsides and lost all of their perks. For example, for both Command Squad and Black Knights, Plasma Talons are no longer Assault. You cannot advance and shoot these anymore. You used to be able to do that, now you can't. That sucks. And so not only is their shooting terrible, honestly, their melee is kind of terrible. The fact that you can only bring them in squads of 3 or squads of 6, nothing in between, and certainly nothing larger. Gone are the days of the 10-man brick, and realistically, even the 5-man brick. You can't bring a 5-man brick, because if you take 5, you're still paying for that 6th model, so you might as well take that 6th model. I'm not a huge fan of 10th edition basically saying you can't just pay per model. I think that's really dumb and wildly simplistic. But, oh well, I don't get to write the rules. And so, yeah, if you take a command squad at minimum sized, you're literally you have to bring the champion, ancient, and apothecary. Which, by the way, the apothecary in a min-sized squad does literally nothing because he doesn't hand out a feel no pain. He doesn't provide any kind of buffs other than bringing a model back. Except he can't bring back characters, so he can't bring back the ancient or the champion. Champion gives you +1 to advance rolls, +1 to charge rolls. Cool. Except their melee is garbage, so you don't want to charge them. The ancient gives them +1 to their OC. Except there's only 3 of them, so having a total OC of 9 super doesn't matter. You're not bringing plasma bikes to sit on an objective. That's not what they're for. Yeah, they're a garbage unit that doesn't do anything. You're never taking the command squad. I would argue you're probably not even taking the Black Knights. For how much they cost, they don't do anything. You have to take Sam and pay like another 150 points just to make them somewhat usable so that they can advance and charge. And I just think it's not worth it. And yeah, they're first of all, they changed the name on their weapons to just Black Knight Close Combat weapons. You could have just kept calling them Corvus hammers. If you were going to give them a different name from power weapons, you could have just kept calling them Corvus hammers. There was no need to change the name and make it super bland and vanilla. But whatever. Their Corvus hammers are strength 5, AP 1, damage 1. Super uninteresting. You're never taking these guys. They're not good in melee. Their shooting is only okay. They're not assault, but they gained rapid fire 1, which is ridiculous because like they've got 2 attacks base, but are rapid fire 1. So if they get within half range, they'll get 1 more attack. Not real sure how they're firing just 3 shots from 2 barrels, but whatever. Yeah, and then like, on the charge, they gain anti-vehicle and anti-monster 4+, which super doesn't matter because they're only AP 1, damage 1. You're not using these guys to kill vehicles. You're never taking them. They don't do anything. They don't have enough shots to be a horde counter. They're not quite strong enough to really be that much of a threat to elite infantry. There are better threats. They're not good at taking out vehicles or monsters. They don't have particularly good melee. They're not a threat. You're not taking them. They're useless. Anyways, moving along, that was the worst units. The speeders and the planes are what's left, and they're actually okay-ish. The Dark Shroud actually got better. It's the only unit in the whole Ravenwing that actually got a net buff, because it does exactly what it did in 9th edition, but a little bit more. What the Dark Shroud is, it's a speeder, which is basically like an attack helicopter that has an ancient old arcane relic on top of it. It's like this ancient forbidden technology that everyone has forgotten how to use that hands out bubbles of darkness, of like invisibility, basically. It's used to like cover the movements of the Ravenwing, and it has traditionally handed out a -1 to hit against Dark Angel's units. And that's what it does now. It hands out the stealth ability, and literally any units within 6 inches, or any friendly Adeptus Astartes units within 6 inches count as having cover. Pretty solid. It used to just hand out a -1 to hit, now it hands out a -1 to hit and cover. So it's objectively better. It's also got better toughness. It went from movement 12 to movement 14, went from toughness 6 to toughness 8, went from 9 wounds to 10 wounds. It's got like 3 attacks at a weapon skill of 3+. It can carry either a heavy bolter or an assault cannon, 3 up armor, 5 up invuln, OC of 3, and leadership of 6+. So just better all around. It's, like I said, the only unit that got objectively better. Although the Vengeance Speeder, I don't know if I'd say it's better, but it's the same. The Vengeance Speeder, there are things about it that are worse, like it lost a lot of its kind of synergistic abilities, but the Vengeance Speeder is literally just the same model as the Dark Shroud, but instead of an ancient relic, it just has a pair of giant fuck-off plasma cannons mounted on it. And they're still amazing. They're still base strength 8, base damage 2, they supercharged to strength 9, damage 3. Still really solid. It actually has a better attack profile because it used to have 2d3 shots. It now has d6 +1. So instead of a minimum shots of 2, max of 6, it has minimum shots 2, maximum of 7. Objectively better. It also gained the ability that anytime you or once per turn, when you destroy a Dark Angel unit within 6 inches of it, it can shoot back at the destroying unit as if it were the shooting phase. That's really good. Yeah, park this guy next to a Talon Master to keep it safe, and next to some Devastators, so that if you shoot at my Devastators, I can shoot you with a bunch of Strength 9 Plasma. Yeah. Like I said, these speeders are probably the only thing that got objectively better. And then, this video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to try and rush this along. The last 2 units we need to talk about are the aircraft, the planes. These didn't necessarily get better or worse, they're kind of the same. So the only thing in this, like I said, the only thing in this index that got better were the Vengeance Speeder and Dark Shroud. Everything else is either the same or worse. The Nephilim Jet Fighter. It's -1 to be hit if you're shooting at him. If the thing attacking it has the fly keyword, it also is -1 to wound. And other than that, it's an aircraft. It's got a minimum movement of 20 inches, toughness 8, 3-up armor. I think it's got like 11 wounds. The 5-up invuln from being Ravenwing. Yeah, that's what it does. The only other thing of note is that it has some pretty interesting weapons. Like its Black Shield missiles are anti-fly 2+, so if you shoot its missiles at anything that has the fly keyword, you automatically wound on a 2+. It's AP3, damage D6, so kind of swingy, but still could do some real damage. It can also take a twin las cannon, which oddly enough isn't twin-linked when it's what used to be 2 separate heavy bolters are now just 1 twin-linked heavy bolter, but meanwhile the twin las cannon is not twin-linked. Again, this is just a really weird design choice. Like, the 2 heavy bolters really should be separate, not twin-linked, and the las cannon that is currently treated as just 2 shots should just be 1 shot twin-linked, so I'm not real sure what the design process was there. There's a lot of design stuff here that doesn't make a lot of sense, but moving on. As for the alternative build of the Nephilim, is the Dark Talon. It's just the fancier, gustied-up version of the Nephilim. Has different guns. It has 2 separate Hurricane Bolters that are 6 attacks, rapid fire 6. So this plane can hand out 24 bolt gun shots. That's actually not bad. If you zoom this guy in real close to like Hormagaunts or Guardsmen that are toughness 3, yeah, a storm of strength 4 shots, that's gonna clear some stuff out. It has a once per game ability called a Stasis Bomb. This is a callback to 7th edition and a couple earlier editions than that, where once per game, when you fly over an enemy unit, you just automatically do D3 mortal wounds, but the other thing is you roll a D6. On a 1 to a 3, that unit cannot fall back and cannot advance. On a 4+, the unit just has to remain stationary, meaning it cannot move, it cannot charge, it cannot pile in, it cannot consolidate. Meaning that a well-placed stasis bomb followed by a Deathwing charge could mean that you get to attack your opponent's unit, but he doesn't get to pile in or consolidate into you. That could be amazing. That could genuinely be... That's like the one... But it only goes off on a 4+ once per game. So, much like the Nephilim, I'm pretty sure it still has the twin heavy bolter. It also has a rift cannon, which got kind of amazing, because it's got devastating wounds with a 3 damage gun. It's blast heavy D3. It's AP4, strength 16, damage 3. The damage 3 part is particularly interesting because that means like, oh, I roll a 6 to wound, cool, you just take 6 mortal wounds. You just take 3 mortal wounds. Yeah, that's pretty, but it's already AP4, so a lot of things you're targeting it with weren't going to get a save anyway. The D3 shots is kind of swingy and pretty like giving it blast, because at strength 16 and D3 shots, you kind of want to target vehicles where the blast rule isn't going to be relevant. But whatever. Again, just kind of a weird design choice. To make it a blast weapon, but also make it super strong so you're wanting to target vehicles. Again, it really feels like whoever designed the Ravenwing didn't actually know anything about the Ravenwing. It feels like whoever did the Dark Angels Index just didn't actually know anything about the Dark Angels and just kind of threw some stuff at it to make it kind of make sense, but not really. But yeah, those are the units. The really only combos I can think of that are even kind of interesting are Sam with a max squad of Black Knights, or a Talon Master, a Vengeance Speeder, and some Devastator squads all parked together. Maybe with a Dark Shroud if you've got the points. But other than that, the Ravenwing are looking a little meager. They're not looking great. Like none of the enhancements are amazing on them, or any enhancement that's good on them is probably better on something else. Again, the exception being Talon Master with the Shroud of Heroes. That could be kind of cool. You know, we're having him res on a 2+. Sure. But again, that's every bit as good on a Captain or a Librarian or whoever. So, like, yeah. Ravenwing are looking real rough, but this video's getting real long, so I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully, this gave you a pretty comprehensive look of how the Ravenwing are going to be playing for the next year or so, because we're not getting a codex until spring of 2024. And with that all being said, I do appreciate you making it this far. Hopefully the salt wasn't too thick in this video. I appreciate you making it to the end. It really does help me out. Let me know what your thoughts on the Ravenwing are. I'd be really curious to know. Like, sincerely, believe it or not, I actually do really want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments. But I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. I'd love to see you guys in some of the other videos we've got coming up. Remember, we got gameplay videos every Friday, more hobby videos like this every Monday. I'd love to see you over there, but in the meantime, happy wargaming.
Onward to glory!